Okay, great. Well, hello and welcome to the webinar, Accessibility 101, Weaving Access into Your Organization and Programs with the National Endowment for the Arts Office of Accessibility. My name is Lizzie Morales, and I serve as the Arts and Education Program Director and the Accessibility Coordinator at the Maryland State Arts Council. I am a white woman with brown eyes, brown curly shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing a green teal shirt, and I have a blurred background behind me. My pronouns are she and her. Now I'm going to make space for my colleague, Derek, to introduce himself.
Thank you, Lizzie, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Derek Quevedo. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a brown Asian person with spiky black hair, glasses, beard, and a black shirt. In addition to working alongside Lizzie on MSAC's accessibility team, I'm also our office secretary. I also identify as disabled and chronically ill.
Thank you, Derek. Derek is a huge support to our accessibility team at the Maryland State Arts Council. And we are also joined today by our presenters, Beth Bienvenu, who is the Accessibility Director, and Catherine Hayward, who is the Accessibility Specialist at the National Endowment for the Arts. And I also want to acknowledge that we have some people here from throughout the state of Maryland, but we also have some people joining us from around the country, and we just want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today's webinar will be recorded. We will pause this recording during the question and answer part of the webinar just because we want to make sure our audience is comfortable asking questions. This recording will be shared with everyone who is registered. So the next slide is a reference shot of our Google Meets platform. This is the toolbar at the bottom of your Google Meet screen. Some features that I'll point out are the microphone on and off button, the camera on and off button. Please do keep your microphone on mute during the presentation portion of the webinar, and there will be a time for questions towards the end where we will invite the audience to ask questions either by raising your hand and coming off mute, or you can also enter them into the chat box. You also have access to automated closed captioning and the reactions buttons. So the next reference shot is at the bottom right corner of your Google Meets panel, where you can find the meeting information, call-in numbers. You can also view participants. We will be using the chat box feature during today's presentation. We'll also use that meeting tools feature during the webinar today, especially that polling tool for when the time comes. Next, I'm going to go through our grounding slides, which you may be familiar with if you have participated in any of our other previous Maryland State Arts Council events. And these next few slides really help ground us in a shared space and mindset for today's event. So our first grounding slide is our land acknowledgement statement. This statement was developed in consultation with tribal leaders. I'm going to go ahead and read this out loud. We acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are home of its first peoples, the Accohonic Indian Tribe, the Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choctaw Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nashu-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Youghiogheny River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. If you want to learn more about land acknowledgement statements, we do have resources on our website, and I will put a link in the chat box. Our next slide is our equity and justice statement. The arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council is committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. The Maryland State Arts Council and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, class, language, and/or ability. The vision of the Maryland State Arts Council is to play an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And the mission is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all of the people of Maryland. This past year, we adopted a new strategic plan for the next 5 years. The text in red are the 5 pillars in our strategic plan, which I will read aloud. Access, bolster access to arts experiences and resources. Amplify the stories of Maryland's arts sector and the value of public support. Connection, foster networks within and beyond the arts sector. Equity, cultivate a thriving arts ecosystem centered in equity. And leadership, commit to a culture of care and innovation. These are our creative meeting actions to remind us of being in a shared space together, which I'll go ahead and read aloud. Celebrate being in a space with other creative people. Engage with everyone's presence as a gift. Acknowledge that together we know a lot. Enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry. Share your idea and trust that it'll be heard. Use I statements. Focus your language on the task at hand, hold one another accountable here, honor all perspectives and build on shared ideas, and balance speaking and listening. I also want to remind everyone that to have some grace and patience with us if we do run into any technical challenges today. Not everyone is used to delivering information on the Google Meets platform, and we're all here to learn, share, and be in a supportive space with each other. So the Maryland State Arts Council supports artists and organizations in Maryland through our grant-making programs, but we also offer professional development and other events throughout the year, such as this one. We do have several sessions on topics such as copyright, trademarks, patent law, fair use, design patents for fashion industry, and legal office hours with our Maryland Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. We also have an upcoming public art roster how to apply webinar. So if you'd like to visit our Eventbrite page for more information on these upcoming events, I'm going to go ahead and put a direct link in the chat box in case you're interested in registering. And then if you're interested in getting more involved in our programs, we are always looking for panelists. Panelists do the important work of evaluating applications for grants and rosters. There are actually a call for panelists listed for our creativity grant, our presenting and touring roster program, and professional development grant. Next week, there'll be a posting for a call for arts and education grant panelists, so stay tuned for that. I will note that you do need to be a Maryland resident to apply to be a panelist, and these are compensated positions. So again, I will post a web link in the chat box in case you're curious and want to know more information. All right, so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can turn it over to our presenters, Beth and Catherine. Give me a moment to do that. And I will like to invite them to share their screen and introduce themselves.
I will go ahead and introduce myself while Catherine pulls up the slides. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Lizzie and Derek, for inviting us. This is really exciting to be here talking with you guys, and doubly so because I live in Maryland. As you can imagine, those of us agencies in DC, we have quite a few people out in Maryland. I perform in 2 ensembles that are Maryland based, so happy to be here with you guys. Again, yeah, my name is Anthony. I am the director of the Office of Accessibility at the NEA. Been here about 15 years, and we've really been diving into working with the different states and doing presentations in this relatively new virtual environment, and it's been exciting to be able to reach out to people across the country and share this important information. I'm happy to be joined by my colleague Catherine, who will introduce herself in a moment. And just to do our accessibility work, I am a middle-aged white female. I don't get to use the filter in Google Meet, so you can see little dark circles more so than in some of the other platforms. I have light brown hair, and I'm wearing a red folk-inspired top. And another accessibility check is to disclose that I am a person who stutters, and it might come out, it might not. So I just like to state that up front. I guess we can go ahead and get started with the next slide. If you're not familiar with the NEA, we were established by Congress in 1963, and we're an independent federal agency that is the largest funder of the arts and communities nationwide, and a catalyst of public and private support for the arts. And so our agenda for today, we're going to dive right in. We're going to be talking about disability and communities, why this is important. And then the other reason why it's important is the accessibility laws, the regulations, and some of the requirements. And then how to improve engagement with people with disabilities. And then we'll provide some examples of physical and program accessibility. We'll have resources in Q&A, and throughout we will have some poll questions and some opportunities to be interactive in the chat, which is always fun. So we encourage you to engage in that, and also to put any questions that you have, and we'll either address them as they come up if they're relevant, or we can do that at the end. We'll have a Q&A. We might have a break in the middle. We'll see how our timing goes. But our first, I'll turn it over to Catherine in a minute, but I'll give people a chance. I'll do this slide. Our first chat question is, what type of organization or art form do you represent? Whether it's like theater, dance, museums, arts ed, presenting, etc. Or if you're with a disability organization, we'd love to see where you're from. While you're doing that, I will turn it over to Catherine, who will introduce herself and get the rest of the session started.
Thank you, Beth. This is Catherine Hayward. I am the accessibility specialist working with Beth in the National Endowment for the Arts Office of Accessibility. I am a white woman, early middle age, I guess. I have long, brown, unruly hair tied back in a ponytail with still some of the frizz showing up, a very small, sparkly nose stud, and without any preparation, Beth and I are in a similar color scheme. I have some bright reds and shades of red and black abstract sleeveless blouse with the NEA background set as my background. I just wanted to leave the question up for a moment, and maybe now it's in the chat and we've gotten some responses. Feel free to interrupt me and share some of who we're hearing from. As I present and move the slides, I am not able to see anything else. So
I'll jump in. I'll jump in and say that we're getting some great responses. People, a number of our state arts agency folks from around the country, which is exciting. And then we see art museums, visual arts, literary arts. A nice range of folks. Children's theater, arboretum, and and a member of the Maryland State Arts Council.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing, Beth. This is Catherine again, and this helps to kind of know who our audience is, and some of the information is an overview and general, which can be applied in all of your settings, but feel free at the end if you have some specific questions to let us know. So to provide a little bit of background, we like to talk about disability and the frameworks in which it's been viewed, as well as some of the estimates around it. So there have been, there's multiple models of disability, but there are two that get contrasted a lot because they mark a change in the way that people with disabilities are viewed. And for decades, the medical model was the prevalent view. And in that model, it's the individual who must be fixed. So the problem is really rooted in the disability and is rooted within the individual who is seen as the one who cannot do something and is the one in which has to adapt to the situation. The social model views that it's really the environment that's causing the difficulties, and that it's within the environment that the barriers exist. And if those barriers are addressed, disability is no longer a problem. So, for example, I am a wheelchair user, and the medical model would say that it's because I cannot walk or do stairs that's the reason I can't get into a theater. Whereas the social model would say, if there's a ramp or an elevator or some other way that has considered someone who might have mobility difficulties, that there is no longer a problem and I could participate. There are many different disability types, and it's up to the individual to pick how they want to identify. But I wanted to share a few different ways of thinking about disability, because we often have the immediate image of someone in a wheelchair or someone using a mobility device as a person with a disability. And there are many, many other types of disabilities. So, for example, people with sensory perception disabilities, and this can include people with low vision or who are blind, or people who are hard of hearing or deaf. There's also people with mental health conditions, and there's lots of different terminology around that. Also, one of the biggest groups is people with non-visible or non-apparent disabilities. And this can include those with chronic health conditions, those in chronic pain, those who identify as chronically ill, people with long haul COVID or long COVID. There's an increasing number around that. There's also a way of thinking about the different ways in which each of us process information. So I have two terms here, neurodiversity and neurodivergent. And neurodiversity really looks at the spectrum and breadth of differences in the way in which all of our brains work. And that can include things like those who are neurotypical, as well as those who may identify as neurodivergent. And neurodivergence can include cognitive and intellectual disabilities, as well as people on the autism spectrum, ADHD. And there's really a growing body of people who may identify in that way, but you've probably heard it most commonly connected with people who identify as autistic or neurodivergent. So our first poll question, before we get into the data, is: do you have a close friend or family member, including yourself, with a disability? Yes or no? And I encourage you to think about it in the way of some of the different examples we've given, whether someone identifies or not.
I just want to jump in. I'm not seeing a poll question, and people are putting it in the chat.
Yeah,
So
and
We can do it that way too. Or Lizzie, are you able to explain the?
yeah, I can explain where the poll is. Putting it in the chat is fine, but if you do click on the meeting tools icon, which is next to the chat box, it's a waffle or a square with 9 dots, and then you click on polls, you'll see, you'll be able to vote on your poll. And then we can share the results in just a moment. So I'm just going to give people a little bit of time to vote. Maybe a few more seconds.
Yeah, it's fun to use the poll boxes.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and show results to everyone. Hopefully you can see it if you're in that poll box. But what's interesting is there is no one that says no. And we saw that in the chat box. So lots of people were saying yes there, and a lot of people are voting in the poll. So yes has 23 votes and no has 0.
Wow. I have to say I'm not really that surprised when we think of it in the broader sense, and we sort of our attention's drawn to it. I identify as a disabled person, but I would say the majority of my family members also would. But I don't know for sure that that's how they identify. But I have a brother with ADHD. I have a nephew on the autism spectrum. My mom is a 2-time cancer survivor. So there is also that diversity of experience. So these are some of the numbers that are out there given the national surveys that are done. And I'll talk in a minute about how these are likely underestimates. But according to, a national survey data from 2022, 1 in 4 or 29% of adults in the United States are living with disabilities. And then, that number increases as we age. So 44% of adults 65 and over have disabilities. And that still makes the disability community the largest minority group in the US. So my chat question, and if it's easier, if you can all see this, if it's easier to just go with this, people can respond, or if someone's able to type it in the chat, if that's useful, is do you think the disability estimate for Maryland is higher, lower, or about the same as the national estimate of 29%?
So Catherine, we're getting a lot of responses and everyone is saying higher.
Okay. Well, I think it's probably higher too, but according to the national survey, and this is the 2022 data, it's similar. So it's approximately 1 in 4. It comes down to 24% of adults in Maryland are living with disabilities. And again, this is adults. So of course, we're missing a major population of children. I have on the right side an image which is the shape of Maryland State with 4 stick figures. One is orange, representing the 1 in 4. And there's also text saying 1,107,766 adults in Maryland have a disability. And this is equal to 24%, or 1 in 4 adults in Maryland. And in Maryland, and again, these were pre-selected categories, and I can talk a lot about the errors in survey methodology, but given the data that we do have out there, the highest percentage is among those with a cognition disability. So 16% having a cognition disability, which means serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. And I added that in case I couldn't remember what cognition disability was defined as. And second is 14% of adults having a mobility disability, along with 8% having a hearing disability and 5% with a vision disability.
Catherine, this is Beth. Just to clarify, those are the percentages of people who report having a disability, not of the whole population. Just which one?
I think so, but I will double check because it's probably in the notes. I can't see.
It's probably of people with disabilities.
Yeah, I think so, but I
Although
will.
it only adds up to about 40%, so or 45%. So it might. Yeah.
There's also there's self-care disability and independent living disability are the two other disability types that they measure. Yeah, it's probably if you say yes, you have a disability, then you go on to say which one.
Yeah, the challenge is it's defined differently and measured differently. Different government agencies measure, different groups. So it's hard. It's hard to compare.
Yes, there's different national surveys that do measure disability differently. So you might see different numbers. It doesn't mean that these estimates aren't accurate. It is most likely that they ask the question in a different way, which is something when you are reporting data, I would encourage you to give that context of how questions were asked. I just wanted to include a little bit of the data for background because I am a self-proclaimed data nerd, but I also think it's helpful to see the numbers because knowing that there are at least this many people with disabilities across the country and specifically within your state shows that, people with disabilities are in your communities and you're likely to engage them or want to engage them in some way. And we're not just thinking about audiences or patrons, but also staff, volunteers, board members, the artists you're working with, and students as well. So we've talked a little bit about some of the other issues with data measurement and sort of survey methodology, but this data also doesn't capture those who don't see themselves as having a disability. And I think about like my aging parents and, at the time, grandparents, they really don't see their difficulties with seeing or hearing or moving as a disability, but rather this is what happens when you age. You can also see this with others who have a different identity, such as veterans. So it's important to think about that in the sense of the language that you use and the way that you're trying to promote your access services. Also, these national surveys have come under a lot of criticism for not really gathering information about people with non-apparent disabilities. They don't get into things like fatigue or other types of sensory overload and really the depth of the disability experience. And with that, I'm going to switch it to Beth to talk about the laws and regulations and as well as some of the requirements.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, so we like to talk about it kind of like the carrot and the stick. Like one of the reasons that it's important to be accessible to all audiences and populations is that it's good for your organization. You're representing your population. And it's great for retaining your audiences and attracting new audiences, but it's also the law. There are two laws that apply to this, and we will go over those. And I just want to note that we have a set of accessibility symbols at the top of this slide, and you can download them, and we'll have the link to that at the end. I think we have it there, but if Lizzie has access to that, or Derek, if you have access to that link, you can put it in the chat. You can download these and use them in your promotional materials to say, yes, we have Braille, or this is where the accessible entrance is. But I'll just quickly describe them. They're small black squares with white images in them, and From the left, there is one indicating for people who are blind, closed captioning, Braille, the universal wheelchair symbol, the more modernized one, sign language, audio description, and assisted listening devices. So you can download those and more. There's others as well, open captioning and others. You can download those using that link. And actually, we partnered with the Graphic Artists Guild to print those or to develop those back in the 1990s, and they're still used, and some of them are updated. But so, of the two laws that cover many, if not all, arts organizations, the first was the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and you might have heard of 504, Section 504. Is the part of this act that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. Hold on just one moment. I apologize. You all know what the pollen is like right now. So it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs conducted by federal agencies such as NEA events, or any event that's hosted by federal agencies and also our buildings. And also those receiving federal financial assistance, which includes our grantees, the Maryland State Arts Council, and then that trickles down to any of you that receive the funds from the Maryland State Arts Council. So when the Rehab Act was passed, it was a big accomplishment, but it didn't cover everybody. So after years of continued advocacy by the disability community, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. And that prohibits discrimination and ensures equal opportunity for people with disabilities. And there are there are many titles to this act, but the main ones that apply to all of you or in this context are Title II, which applies to state and local governments, which are the state arts agencies, local arts agencies, as well as universities, state-run museums and libraries, etc. And then Title III, which covers most everybody else, places of public accommodation and services, private organizations, commercial facilities. So in addition to restaurants, movie theaters, hotels, etc., it includes museums, performing arts centers, theaters, galleries, classrooms, outdoor spaces, etc. And so this means that all organizations are legally required to ensure physical accessibility of their spaces, provide reasonable and necessary accommodations for participants, visitors, and audiences and staff, and to ensure effective communication of all of your materials, your events, your performances, etc. And one way that you can do this that's really helpful and required in many situations is to have an accessibility coordinator. This person can serve as a point of contact for arranging accommodations. It's a requirement under Section 504. So if you receive our funding or the Maryland State Arts Council funding that trickles down from us, and also the ADA. This doesn't have to be a full-time position. This doesn't have to be a separate, a new person that you hire. This can be a part of the job of someone in visitor services, marketing, the front office, whoever. But it's really important that they understand what accommodations you're providing and how to provide access. They serve as a point of contact. You have their information on their website, on your website for who to contact and where to go to request an accommodation, and where to ask questions. So make sure that you have a person, and you need to indicate that in your grant information if you receive a grant from us. And when you think about accommodations, these can be made upon request, which is kind of like the bare minimum. Like, I'm coming to your museum and I need a Braille tour information materials. So you can ask for those, or you can have it for specific dates of performances and activities, such as you have 20 performances of your play, and these 3 are going to have sign language or captioning. It's always better if you have more. So if having it included in every activity is the best practice. We understand that it's kind of expensive to have ASL at every event or audio description, but having it at in some of the performances or of the occurrences of your event. But it's always best to do as much as you can and as you can afford. So let's see. To verify, there's a question. The law requires that any organization that receives MSAC funding to employ an accessibility coordinator. Yes. Yes, you must have an accessibility coordinator, but again, it doesn't have to be a full-time position. You don't have to hire somebody, but it can be someone who does this as part of their job. Yes, you need to designate one. And it's important to make accommodations request easy. Include access information in all of your project publicity, whether it's press releases, programs, media, websites, emails, and how to request the accommodation and any deadlines for requests. If you're providing audio description or ASL, contact your vendors ahead of time, determine how far in advance you need to book them, and provide that deadline for those requests. And then, as I said, provide the contact information. It doesn't have to be the person's name. It could just be info at your URL, and a phone number and email for those requests. Just make sure people know how to request, and also what you are providing. Say, we have large print, we have Braille, we have, we're going to have ASL at this event, we're going to have captions. So have that information and make it readily available and easy to find out. So I will pass it back over to Catherine to talk about how to improve your engagement with people with disabilities.
Thank you, Beth. This is Catherine again. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are some of the ways to create that welcoming environment and improve your engagement with members of the disability community. So, and I think Beth referenced this a little bit early on, accessibility is an organizational asset. In addition to keeping up with the needs of your communities, when you make it a priority or set an intention around it, you're bringing in new and exciting programs. There's a lot of amazing work going on in disability arts, deaf theater, physically integrated dance, and these are just a couple of examples. And disability overlaps with other ways you may be working to attract audiences. If you're trying to either maintain or bring in a larger group of, the older communities, if you are, trying to bring in more youth. We didn't talk a lot about youth statistics, but, we know there are a lot of very specific programs in the school that work with kids and students with disabilities. So whatever your emphasis might be, just remember back to, the poll question, really, and how much we are all affected by knowing someone with a disability. And I have an image. This is a mural done by John Bramblett, who is a disabled artist. He has a vision disability. He did this multi-story mural on the side of a building that is an interpretation and an invitation to the arts district in that community, and has a lot of bright colors of orange and yellow and blue and purples, and sort of this cityscape. And if someone was reading or if someone was using a screen reader, there is alt text for this image. So welcoming people with disabilities, a lot of that is just letting people know that you are thinking of them. So one way to do that is to have a accessibility statement on your website, to have some resources around accessibility, that shows that you have thought about the disability community in some way. Also including plan your visit information. So a way of describing what to expect if they come to the venue, and that can include both the physical aspects of the venue as well as what access services are going to be available. Make sure that your social media is accessible. So, caption your videos, use alt text for images, use accessible hashtags. And this is, I think, called camel case, where what you want to do is make sure that you capitalize the first letter of each word. So you see that accessible has a capital A and hashtags has a capital H. And that's because a screen reader reading it is not going to be able to distinguish that there are different words unless you use that. And again, promote event accessibility and include contact information on how to find out more or how to request an accommodation. If it's something printed or that's using very small amounts of space, you can use some of the disability access symbols to convey the access services that you're providing. Include access information in all project publicity. So press releases, any programs for the event, media, website, even your email. Just be sure that whatever promotional materials you're using and has an access element. So again, providing the contact information for requests, any additional information about your facility, like the location of accessible entrances, especially if they're difficult to find, like they're not near the front door that most people will be using. It's good to share some of that up front. Some of the ways that you can show your organizational commitment to accessibility include budgeting for accessibility. And I always advise when I'm doing technical assistance for organizations to research options. Even if you don't need to provide a sign language interpreter for the thing that's coming up, it's good for you to have an idea of how much things cost in your area. And they do vary by geography and availability. So you want to have a sense of, well, if I have to hire an audio describer or a sign language interpreter, how much that's going to be. And that way you can also include that in your grant budget. That's one of the things that I think people who read grant applications check, or at least in my previous job when I was an arts administrator more directly with the grants process. If someone said they were going to be accessible and had access features intended to be used, and you don't see that in the budget, then that seems like a little bit of a disconnect. And it's okay. It's okay to have it in the budget. Whatever your main activity is, it's fine to have some access services as a line item. Also, train staff and volunteers on the services, equipment, and how to interact with someone with a disability when they're asking questions or trying to find out more about access. I've had situations just personally where maybe the house manager knows what they provide, but the usher, who's the one that's actually taking me to my seat, doesn't know when I ask a question. And it's created, unfortunately, some negative experiences in some cases. Also be sure if you're an agency that has either grant opportunities or fellowship opportunities or other opportunities for individual artists, that the call for submissions and the application process is accessible. You can also assess your accessibility. We have a couple of checklists you can use, and we can provide those links. We have a brief accessibility checklist and also a Section 504 self-assessment. Also, hire consultants, and preferably someone with a disability. Also, gather feedback from Access Advisory Committee members who hopefully have a representation of different experiences and different disabilities. Also hire user testers for programs and facilities. So again, get feedback from people with disabilities and pay them for their expertise. Nothing about us without us has been a mantra since the disability rights movement that continues to be used, although it's becoming a nothing without us. Ensure that people with disabilities are represented throughout your organization or that you're getting feedback in some way. This can include, recruitment with board, staff, volunteers, panels, other committees. You can also conduct a community needs assessment if you feel like you're not getting enough perspectives for what you're trying to test or what you're trying to get feedback on. You can also partner with organizations serving people with disabilities and engage artists with disabilities and members of the disability community. And sometimes that can take a little work and is often something where word of mouth really helps. So, start with the person that you know and build out from there. And also allow the time to really make these meaningful relationships. So poll question number 2, as we're going to get in some examples about physical and program accessibility, we just want to do a little check-in about how knowledgeable do you feel you are about accessibility? Not knowledgeable at all, slightly knowledgeable, moderately knowledgeable, very knowledgeable, or extremely knowledgeable. And again, this is not a test. This is to help us know how we can best present the next set of information.
Just a reminder, I put some instructions in the chat, but if you go to the meeting tools icon, which is that waffle or square with dots next to the chat box, you'll be able to click on that, then click on polls. And we see a lot of people filling in the poll right now. I'm just going to give another few seconds for people to access that. Okay, well, the majority of people we have 13 out of 21 are saying moderately knowledgeable. And then the second one is 5 votes for slightly knowledgeable, and then some not very knowledgeable. We have about 2 people, and then 1 vote for not knowledgeable at all.
Great, thanks, Lizzie. That's good to know. And it seems like we do have a range. So we'll speak to that. Now I'm going to switch it back over to Beth to talk a little bit about physical accessibility.
Yeah, thank you. This is Beth. So now we're going to talk about how people can access your buildings, the places where you're holding your programming. And I want to point to a link that we have on this slide for the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. It's a pretty user-friendly website. It still has all the little legal codes and things, but you can see how the measurements, how wide the doors need to be, the layout of the restrooms. So I find it pretty helpful, once you get used to how it works. And thank you for putting that in the chat. So it's just, how do you get in the door? I mean, how do you make sure that people can access the facilities where your activities are taking place? And this can include historic facilities. And how do you make those accessible? Not just getting in the door, but getting throughout the building and to the places where the programs are happening. And don't forget that people with disabilities can include staff and your volunteers, your ushers, artists, and all, as well as your participants, audiences, and visitors. So some examples of things to keep in mind, the path of travel into and through your building. So having a ground level no step entry or ramped entry, and ramped access within your building. Like there's often areas where you might have a couple of steps up, making sure that those have ramps available, and then also elevators to get between floors. Directional signage is crucial, and that's where the symbols can come in. How often have you approached a building and the main entrance has stairs and no ramp? How do you know where the accessible entrance is? Making sure that there is signage to say that the accessible entrance is around the corner. Like if you go to the Smithsonian's Natural History and American History, it's those buildings with grand staircases, and also the Baltimore Museum of Art. I've noticed grand staircases, but they have lovely entrances around the sides. Making sure that people know where to go up front, but you can put that in your on your website, and also having signs, because especially if it's a large building, if you have to go all around the building to find the entrance, it can be physically taxing and often painful for some people. And then think about the seating, and if you have an auditorium or classrooms, and also in your galleries and in your spaces, in your areas, making sure that wheelchair seating is available throughout, and it's integrated, not just in the back or the front. And we understand that you might have fixed seating where this is a challenge, but having as much integrated as possible is really important. And make sure that you have seating if you're a museum, have it throughout your galleries, because I get tired of looking at art and walking around on hard floors all day. So making sure that you have seating and spaces for wheelchairs. And then think about your box office and any kind of place where people have to go to buy tickets, to get information. Make sure those are wheelchair accessible as well. And then if you have display cases and exhibits, make sure that they are approachable and viewable for a wheelchair user. And actually, when I say wheelchair user, it could be people who are of short stature, and also children, being able to access content. Make sure that the restrooms and water fountains are accessible. Do we still have water fountains? we have the water bottle fillers. Make sure that your emergency exits and your emergency alarms are accessible. That your emergency alarms have audio and visual components to them. And make sure that you're not blocking your emergency exits or making it difficult for someone who uses a wheelchair. And then parking. The design standards I mentioned have the ratio of how many accessible spaces you need if you have parking. Not everybody does, but if you do, you need to provide accessible parking spaces. And then we don't often think, as I mentioned earlier, we don't often think about your staff and your artists. If you're a performance space, are your backstages accessible? Can someone access them from the audience? That's not always feasible, but if you have an effective path of travel from the audience to the stage, it's really important. And then having accessible dressing rooms and restrooms backstage is really important. And then think about your studios and your classrooms as well. And then your staff areas. You don't have to have your entire office be accessible, but enough so that employees and visitors to your offices are able to access them, your meeting rooms and break rooms. And then also making sure that you have remote or hybrid options available for people who may need them. And I'll turn it over to Catherine to talk about program accessibility and effective communication.
Thanks, Beth. I think I'm going to do a very quick break for you all, like maybe 2 minutes, just to be able to stretch, grab some water. In my case, I'm going to grab a tissue really quickly. and maybe do a stretch. So I'll go ahead and leave my camera on, and feel free to do that as well, or not. Or you can add in the chat if there's like a stretch that you think is really great that you want to share with everyone. All right, so 2 minutes, at least by my clock, that will start us back at noon. And that will be our last little bit before we hopefully have some conversation.
And just to note, Catherine's on the West Coast, so we'll be starting back at 3.
Oh, sorry. Yes. 3. Thank you, Beth. All right. Hopefully, many of you are back. This is Catherine again. I know that that was very quick, but I did want to just pause for a moment and allow for people to get up. I know for me, just walking down the hall was a nice break. So coming back in, yes, at 3 o'clock for most of you, and or other times, I'm going to talk about program accessibility. So program accessibility, and I guess I'll do a quick check-in. Does it seem like most people are back, or some people?
I think we're good. But Derek, did you raise your hand?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, great. Thanks. When we're talking about program accessibility, we're talking about all of the aspects of your project activities and how they'll be accessible to participants with disabilities. So once they get in whatever that metaphorical door is, how are they able to, effectively communicate? How both with what's going on, but also how is the activity and content being shared and communicated and implemented with them. And communication access is really a focal point of program accessibility. I'm going to give a few examples of different types of communication access that may be particularly useful for people with specific disabilities, but you'll see that they often, work across disabilities or just for people in general. So for people with vision disabilities, we want to think about being sure to include alt text for images. And if you're able, I recommend that you ask the artist to include alt text, or maybe if you have a couple of questions to get at what would be the most important thing for someone who's unable to see the image, to be able to get, and what are they trying to get across with that image. Alt text is meant to be relatively short, so that can sometimes be an issue when working with artists, but it's helpful with artwork to not have to interpret that yourself. Also, for people with vision disabilities, having audio description and visual description, including, for example, if there's a dance performance going on, what kind of movements are there? What is the significance of the colors or types of costumes that are being worn? Having alternate formats of print materials. So, and really having a print material is kind of an alternate format at this point, but print materials can still be useful for some people, and also having large print and braille options. Also including tactile opportunities. You know, 3D models are great, particularly of, you know, sculptures, or if it's a, you know, a physical space that is historic, having an idea of what that space is like. But there are also a lot of other things that you can do that don't cost anything. So one example is, let's say there's leftover fabrics from costume design of a theater performance. Or maybe there's even an alternate costume that people feel comfortable with having someone touch them. But that can be a really great way of helping to convey some of that visual information. And who doesn't like touching things, really? I mean, I love it when I can touch something in a museum. I feel like such a, you know, like I'm doing something bad and getting away with something. So these are also, you know, features that can really engage the audience in general, or patrons. Also adding alt text description. So I talked about that in the previous slide, and I just wanted to sort of define a couple of terms that we use a lot, but I realize don't always get explained, and some people are newer to. So alternative text, or alt text, is descriptive text that conveys meaning of an image, and we're really thinking about the most important elements. And I have a resource from WebAIM on, you know, some of the details and guidance on how to write alternative text. Audio description, also known as visual description, provides a verbal description of key elements of what is being shown. So alt text is written, and audio description is verbal. Continuing with communication access for people with hearing disabilities, sign language interpretation, assistive listening devices, captioning, and there are lots of types of captioning, open, closed. Real-time captioning is done by a live person and is sometimes preferred and requested. But these are all examples of access services that can be useful for people with hearing disabilities. And transcripts. So I just have a quick note around captioning. So leading into that, we have our third and last poll question. Do you use captions when watching videos, like YouTube videos, TV, films, or anything you might be streaming? Often, sometimes, seldom, never. And I think that's set up, but if it's easier for people in the chat, that's okay too.
Yeah, and I'll just, as a reminder for anyone who joined us a little bit late, You can access the poll by clicking next to that chat box feature in the waffle, which is the square with the dots, and then you click on polls. We have votes still coming in. It's changing a bit, so I'll give a few more seconds before I start reading you the results. Okay, so we have 8 votes for sometimes and 7 votes for often. Those are our highest. And then seldom only has 2 votes and no one has put in never. So often and sometimes are about equal right now.
Okay, thanks. This is Catherine again. I definitely use them quite a lot. I would be often. And it turns out that yes, a lot of people do use caption. And you know, there is a percentage of people with hearing disabilities that use them, but it's really expanded way beyond that. And some of the unsurprising, some marketers have really looked into this and found that 80% of viewers are more likely to finish a video with captions. And I wanted to share this because we often use videos, you know, as a way to promote our events or what's going on. And using captions really could increase the likelihood that someone finishes that video. 80% of 18 to 25-year-olds use captions all or most of the time. I don't know if this surprises you, but it's really the younger generations that are more likely to use captions versus older populations, those like 65 and over. And there has been an increase of 7.3% in YouTube views after adding captions. So some of the reasons, and you know, there's a variety of reasons of why people use captioning, but a big factor is that it helps with understanding, whether that's you're watching something where people have accents, and that's useful to have that complement of a caption, or concentration. I know because I'm in a lot of webinars, usually if I am an attendee or a participant, I use captioning because that really does help me keep focused with what's being presented.
Catherine, this is Beth. I just want to give a couple of comments from the chat. Derek, our friend from Maryland Arts Council, said, I'm autistic and I often have challenges processing information. So I always watch things with captions because it allows me enough time and a different context to better understand what's happening. Eric Idle has a nice little joke. Sometimes I wish my audiobooks had subtitles and then I think about it again. Yeah, sometimes it'd be nice to just have the option to read and listen. Yeah. And then Megan said, I prefer captions and use them most times. I went to the theater for the first time in a long time to see a movie recently and wished captions were available. And then Monica said that she uses it watching British dramas, which I use it for a lot of the time. So that's it for the chat.
Thank you, Beth, for reading out those comments. I really appreciate hearing all of that. And this is Catherine again. I mean, yeah, I recently attended an event where my son was presenting something. It was a tech challenge, so they had lots of different groups. And I don't know if it was the acoustics or probably my hearing's also probably getting worse, but I could not really hear them. And I kind of wish they'd had captions running in the back, because you have all these parents there that want to see their kids. And like, I don't think anyone could really follow what was going on. And it is hard if you're used to them. I can relate to the comment about like going to the theater, that it can be so hard to sort of catch up. And it really is an added value to understanding. So you can see where having captions would, benefit bringing in other audiences. So a couple more examples, and then I want to make sure to leave some time for questions and comments. Again, we talked a little bit about sort of the plan your visit, but some sort of pre-visit material about what to expect. This can help a lot of different people, including people that may have anxiety or sensory issues and want to make sure they're not walking into an environment that will be too overwhelming, or that they won't know where a quiet or safe space will be. You can also have a sensory friendly or relaxed programming where the lights and sounds are reduced. There's warnings for strobes. It's a fragrance free environment, and ability to move around. I tell a lot of stories either about me or with my son, and my son was younger, and we went to a children's theater performance, and I was a little irritated. The accessible seating was all the way in the back, but that's where it was. But my son thought we were like in the best seats of the house because we had more room and there was no one behind us, so he could get up and just, quietly, but like move around or fidget a little bit. And it gave me another perspective, that different things work for different people. Also content warnings, if there's, sometimes called trigger warnings, but if you're dealing with a specific topic or even a sudden change in lighting or sound or things that just, could be really alarming for people that deal with a variety of either mental health conditions or sensory as well. So having content warnings, having quiet hours and spaces if you can, to think about the space that you're in, and if there is anywhere that you can dedicate as a space where people can go to do whatever they need to self-regulate and be able to come back in. The last couple, and we'll see where we're at. Aim for 6th to 8th grade reading levels or lower as appropriate for your audience. Lower is often, so plain language is usually around 6th grade. Easy read is closer to 3rd to 5th grade, and I have a link if people are interested in that. And really, it's what's appropriate to your audience. If you're speaking to your board, that might be something different. But if this is a public event and you're going to have a range of ages, a range of disabilities that you don't know, to try to keep the materials that you're putting out, including your grant guidelines, and other material on your website. Try to keep it at that 6th to 8th grade. Having volunteers or staff to answer questions or provide assistance at events can really be helpful. Schedule time for breaks, more than an hour for something. It's good to take a break. And we took a small break, which was smaller than you would typically do, but we did want to try to at least give a moment, since we're doing 90 minutes, for people to stretch or take care of themselves. And then continue to have live stream and hybrid options. It's been, I would say, a gift that we've been able to do so many virtual trainings, and it's allowed Beth and I to offer our services and work with so many of you by having these virtual options. So last thing, electronic accessibility, which is its own topic that you could spend a whole session on. But some things to keep in mind and to remind, if you do have a webmaster or someone that you work with, to remind them about making sure that the website is set up for screen reader navigation, that you have things that are tab controlled on your website. Again, using alternative text for image, audio or visual description. If you're in a meeting or different events, accessible fonts and appropriate color contrast. Again, captioning, which, we had for this, as well as providing transcripts as needed, and having sign language interpretation. So there's a lot of things that, overlap, whether it's in person or virtually, but there are also some very specific things to keep in mind around, websites and a lot of strictly electronic things. Beth, do you just want to quickly make a note of our resources, and then maybe we can do the last Q&A?
Sure. Before I start, I just want to mention that if you do have questions, you can start putting them in the chat, or we can tackle them once we're done over the next couple slides. So first, I want to mention, we've been so focused on accessibility, but some of our work at the NEA has been around supporting careers in the arts for people with disabilities, helping to break down the barriers to working in the arts for people with different types of disabilities. And so we developed a toolkit with our partner Art Beyond Sight that provides resources for artists, arts employers, arts educators, and arts funders. And you can access that at arts.gov/arts careers toolkit. And there's an image that was a montage of some of the images from the toolkit. And from just going clockwise, the upper left corner is dancer and drummer Siddiqui Konde. He's wearing an African costume on stage. To the right of that is Deaf West Theaters. Oh, I keep forgetting the production. It's a Greek tragedy. Oedipus. A production of Oedipus featuring deaf actors on a stage with spooky blue lighting. I love this photo. The bottom right is a photo from Dancing Wheels, a dance company in Ohio, with 2 women in wheelchairs and a woman kneeling. And one of the women in the chairs is instructing the other 2 in dance moves. And next to that is a black and white image of the Blind Boys of Alabama, 5 older African-American gentlemen wearing sunglasses and very cool suits. They are both Siddiqui and Blind Boys are National Heritage Fellows from the NEA, and Deaf West and Dancing Wheels are NEA grantees. Longtime NEA grantees. So some resources, we'll just put these up. I don't know if over the next few minutes, Derek and Elizabeth can put them in the chat. I want to thank them for doing all of that. It's kind of hard for us to manage that while we're presenting. We have a number of resources on our website. We have some FAQs for applicants and grantees. We have our Section 504 self-evaluation workbook, which is an evaluation is required for all grantees. We have a brief accessibility checklist, which is kind of shorter. It's definitely shorter and easier to use to kind of give you a general idea of what you need to be doing. We recommend you check out the ADA National Network, adata.org. They are a network of 10 regional ADA centers that can help you with questions. We're hoping that they will continue to be funded. They're funded through Health and Human Services. The one for this region is the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, and they're based in Rockville. But you can access resources on any of their pages, and they've got great webinars and trainings. The U.S. Access Board, a government agency, has a lot of resources around built environment, and also they have animation models for the different design standards for accessibility, and then the ADA design standards, which we mentioned. And some of the electronic resources, I'm not going to go through all of them, but WebAIM is a great tool for, and the Wave Accessibility Tool have great resources and tools. The Web Accessibility Initiative have, so there's just great resources to assess your websites and help to correct them. There's also an accessibility checker and a color contrast checker. So yeah, she'll send all those resources out. And yeah, now we have a few minutes for questions, and we have one right now. I can go ahead and read that. Monica says, we have concerts. Do you recommend a captioning visual system or ASL for live music? And when you say captioning visual system, you mean having captions on the screen? I'm assuming that's what you mean. Yes. Yes. You might have seen really cool, fun videos of ASL interpreters interpreting like rock concerts, and they really get into it and they interpret it and they dance with it. So that's a great way to provide access. But if it's classical music or other things, you may not need ASL, but having captions for the spoken components can be very helpful. And if it's just like a choral concert with not a lot of words, you could print the words in the program. But just like with opera, you could have subtitles, surtitles, and captions. So there are ways to be creative. There's also a lot of auto caption options available. They are improving as AI improves. A lot of people in the deaf community prefer a live captioner. But I think getting a sense of who your audiences are and what they prefer is very important. And if you do provide captions, put that on your website or in your promotional materials. You could say, we will provide auto captions will be provided. And then if people prefer live captions, they can reach out to you. Any other questions? Hope that was helpful.
As people take a moment to put questions in the chat box, I am also just going to put a link to a survey in the chat box just to get feedback. This is one of our first accessibility webinars, and we'd love to get feedback on future topics and things that you all are interested in.
Carrie asks, are there apps or app-based technologies that you recommend? Is this for captioning, such as Revoke? I'm not as familiar with apps. Just to clarify, is this for captioning or is this for other forms of access? Not quite sure. I really don't have a good sense. I mean, I know you can use things like PowerPoint to auto generate captions that you can project. Not for captioning, but for accessibility in general. I don't have a good sense of it, and I don't know if Catherine does. Do you know of any resources for people who run spaces that use power tools, educational or shop spaces like wood or metal shops? I don't. Catherine, do you have any experience with that?
Is this for, this is Catherine, is this for people who are using the power tools? Like if there's a resource for like adaptive type power tools?
Tool library.
Oh, tool library, yeah.
Students.
Oh, like being taught how to use power tools. Yeah, I mean, I think using some of the universal design principles for learning can be useful, just to use all of the different ways, whether it's having, there's the speaking of instructions, also having like some sort of diagram, and then, very protected, safe guidance of using if someone needs to be worked with like one-on-one. I know that's kind of like another technique that can be used.
I'm putting the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center's website in the chat, and they might have some thoughts for you. They have contact information, phone and email. You could reach out to them. They might have a better sense, especially within this region.
Yeah.
Also, vocational rehabilitation services might have some good information. That would be a good resource, and I'm assuming that with the Maryland state government. Other questions? We only have a couple more minutes, and I know Lizzie has another couple slides to use, so maybe we can move on.
Yeah, well, thank you, Beth and Catherine. Actually, the question about power tools also made me think about, I know there's a lot of adapted tools for visual arts, like brushes and handles you can add to brushes and things to help with gripping. So maybe something, if you're looking for things to help with gripping and to hold, maybe there's something you could borrow from the visual art community to help with power tools.
Definitely, there's a lot of ways to help with the gripping or leverage or whatever it is. It did remind me though, I mean, if this is a particular student, I think always asking them like either what the issue is or if they have ideas. People with disabilities are very creative because they need to figure out how to do things, and they may have an idea of what would help, even if they don't have that piece themselves, but they may be able to give better information on what they're having trouble with.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and just put up our last slide just to share contact information for Derek and myself. And once again, I'm going to put that survey in the chat box in case anybody missed it. Since we are at time, I do just, really want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's really great to share virtual space with you all. And again, I will be sending a follow-up email for everyone who's registered with the link to the recording, the slides, our contact information, and a lot of those wonderful links that were in the slides. I can put that into the email. And then just before we sign off, I do just want to thank our two presenters, Catherine and Beth, for all that you share. I just want to express my gratitude for your work in uplifting accessibility and the arts throughout the country, and the support, the resources, and the information that you provide. We really appreciate you, and thank you. And this work will continue.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. It's great to talk to everybody.
Yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And again, thank you all for joining us. And thanks again, Beth and Catherine and Derek, for making this webinar happen. We appreciate it.
Thank you.